The crystal chandeliers cast a warm glow across the ballroom as Elena moved between the tables with practiced ease. Her black shoes were starting to hurt after 5 hours on her feet, but she kept the smile on her face. This was just another Saturday night at Riverside Manor, one of the fanciest wedding venues in the city. She'd worked here for almost 3 years now, and she knew the routine by heart. Tonight's wedding was beautiful. White roses everywhere, soft lighting, and over 200 guests dressed in their finest clothes. Elena had served at dozens of weddings, maybe even hundreds by now. She'd seen it all. Crying mothers, drunk uncles doing embarrassing dances, and always that one guest who had too much champagne. But tonight felt different somehow. Though she couldn't put her finger on why, she balanced a tray of empty champagne glasses as she headed back toward the kitchen. The bride looked radiant in her flowing white dress, laughing with her bridesmaids near the cake table. The groom was talking with some older gentlemen, probably his father and uncles. Everything was going smoothly. That's how Elena liked it. Smooth meant good tips. Smooth meant she could finish her shift, drive home, and maybe get a few hours of sleep before her morning classes started. Yeah, Elena was putting herself through college. Business administration, to be specific. Not exactly her passion, but it was practical. It was safe. And after the year she'd had, safe was exactly what she needed. She was 24 years old and felt about 40 most days. Between classes, this job, and trying to keep up with rent on her tiny apartment, she barely had time to breathe. As she cleared plates from one of the corner tables, an elderly man caught her attention. He had that distinguished look about him. Well-dressed suit, silver hair combed back neatly, and kind eyes that crinkled at the corners when he smiled. He reminded Elena of her own grandfather, and that thought made her chest feel tight for a moment. "Excuse me, miss," he said gently, his voice carrying a hint of an accent she couldn't quite place. "Do you have a moment?" Elena set down her tray and turned to him with her professional smile. "Of course, sir. What can I get for you?" He gestured toward the corner of the ballroom, where a beautiful grand piano sat untouched, its black surface gleaming under the lights. "I was wondering if you knew anything about that piano over there. Does anyone play it during these events?" Elena's heart did a strange little flip. She looked at the piano, and for just a second she felt that old familiar pull, that longing she'd buried deep down 3 years ago. Usually they hire a pianist for the cocktail hour and ceremony," she explained, keeping her voice steady. "But I think tonight's musician had to cancel at the last minute or something. I heard the manager talking about it earlier." The old man nodded slowly, looking disappointed. "That's unfortunate. My granddaughter, the bride, she was really hoping for some piano music during the reception. Her mother, my daughter, she loved piano music." His voice got quieter. "She passed away earlier this year. The bride wanted to honor her somehow." Elena felt a lump form in her throat. She knew all too well what it felt like to lose someone important. "I'm so sorry for your loss," she said softly, and she meant it. The old man studied her face for a moment, then glanced back at the piano. "Do you play?" he asked suddenly. The question hit Elena like a splash of cold water. Her hands gripped the empty tray a little tighter. I used to." "A long time ago? How long ago?" "I haven't really played in about 3 years," Elena admitted. She didn't know why she was being so honest with this stranger, but something about his gentle demeanor made the words come easier. "I trained for 12 years, though. Classical piano. I was supposed to go to a conservatory, actually." His eyebrows raised with interest. "Supposed to? What happened?" Elena shrugged, trying to keep it casual even though the memory still stung. "Life happened. My dad got sick, medical bills piled up, and conservatory costs money I didn't have. So I took this job instead. Enrolled in community college for something more practical. Piano was just a dream anyway, not a real career." Even as she said the words, they felt hollow. She'd told herself that story so many times over the past 3 years that she almost believed it. Almost. The old man was quiet for a moment. Then he leaned forward slightly. "Would you consider playing something tonight? Just one song, perhaps. It would mean the world to my granddaughter. To all of us, really." Elena's pulse quickened. "Oh, I don't think that's a good idea. I'm working, and I'm not dressed for performing, and I haven't practiced in forever, and..." "Sometimes the best performances come from the heart, not from practice," he interrupted gently. "And honestly, what you're wearing doesn't matter. The music is what counts." She looked around the ballroom nervously. Her manager, Carol, was across the room talking to the catering supervisor. Carol was strict about staff staying in their roles. Servers served. That was it. But then Elena looked back at the old man's hopeful face, and she thought about his granddaughter, the bride, missing her mother on one of the most important days of her life. "I don't know," Elena said quietly. "I'm really out of practice. Just one song," he encouraged. "Whatever you remember. Whatever you feel comfortable with." Elena's fingers tingled. She realized she'd been unconsciously flexing them, the way she used to before a recital. How many times had she walked past pianos in shopping malls, hotel lobbies, and restaurants over the past 3 years? How many times had she felt that ache to sit down and just play? Too many to count. She'd trained herself to look away, to push down that longing, to focus on being practical and responsible. But standing here now, with this kind old man asking her for a simple gift, something shifted inside her chest. "Okay," she heard herself say before her brain could talk her out of it. "Okay, I'll play one song. But if my manager gets upset, I'm blaming you." The old man's face lit up with the biggest smile. "Deal. And if she gives you any trouble, you send her straight to me." Elena took a deep breath and looked toward the piano. Her heart was pounding now, not from fear exactly, but from something she hadn't felt in a long time. Excitement, maybe, or possibility. She didn't even know what she was going to play yet. Her fingers remembered dozens of pieces, but which one felt right? As she started walking toward the piano, she caught a glimpse of Carol looking her way. The manager's eyes narrowed slightly, clearly wondering why a server was heading toward the performance area. Elena saw the old man quickly move to intercept Carol, talking to her urgently. Elena reached the piano bench and sat down slowly. The ballroom was still loud with conversation and laughter. Nobody was paying attention to her. She was just a server in a vest and white shirt, sitting at a piano that was supposed to remain silent tonight. She lifted the fallboard and looked at the keys. Beautiful ivory and black, perfectly maintained, just waiting. Her hands hovered over them for a moment. 3 years. It had been 3 whole years since she'd played a real piano. Elena closed her eyes, took one more deep breath, and let her fingers find their home on the keys. Elena's fingers trembled slightly as they rested on the piano keys. The weight of them felt both foreign and familiar at the same time, like running into an old friend you haven't seen in years. Her heart was beating so loud she wondered if anyone nearby could hear it. The ballroom buzzed with noise around her. Guests laughing at table 7. The clinking of silverware on plates. Someone's uncle telling what was probably an embarrassing story based on the roar of laughter that followed. Nobody was looking at her. Nobody cared that a server in a basic work uniform was sitting at the piano. She was invisible, which somehow made this both easier and harder. She chose Claire de Lune. It was the first piece that came to mind, probably because it was the last one she'd performed publicly before everything fell apart. Her high school recital 3.5 years ago, back when she still believed music could be her future. Back when her dad was healthy and life seemed full of possibilities. The first notes came out soft. Too soft, maybe. Her fingers felt stiff, unpracticed. But then something happened. Something she didn't expect. The music started to wake something up inside her, like turning on lights in a house that had been dark for too long. Her fingers began to remember the patterns, the rises and falls, the gentle way Debussy wanted this piece to feel like moonlight on water. The sound floated across the ballroom, delicate and clear. And slowly, conversation at the nearest table started to fade. One person stopped talking. Then another. Then a whole table went quiet, heads turning to find where the music was coming from. Elena didn't notice at first. Her eyes were closed now and she was somewhere else entirely. She was back in her childhood living room, practicing on the old upright piano her grandfather had saved for months to buy her. She was in her high school auditorium, nervous but excited before a performance. She was in every moment she'd ever loved music before real life taught her that love doesn't pay the bills. More heads were turning now. The conversations were dropping like dominoes, one section of the room after another going silent. Even the catering staff who had been rushing in and out of the kitchen stopped in their tracks. One of Elena's co-workers, Michael, stood frozen in the doorway holding a tray of desserts, his mouth literally hanging open. Her manager, Carol, had been mid-conversation with the venue coordinator, probably discussing some logistical detail when the music reached her ears. She stopped talking and turned sharply toward the piano. Her expression went from confused to shocked, to something Elena couldn't quite read from this distance. The old gentleman was still standing next to Carol, and he put a gentle hand on her arm as if to say, "Just let this happen." Near the cake table, the bride had been laughing with her bridesmaids about something. She stopped mid-laugh, her hand flying to her chest. Her eyes went wide and started filling with tears. She grabbed her new husband's sleeve, pulling him around to look at where the music was coming from. He wrapped his arm around her shoulders as they both watched Elena play. The groom's father, a tall man with a booming voice who'd been telling stories all night, went completely silent. The flower girl, maybe 5 years old, tugged on her mother's dress and whispered loudly, "Mommy, is that an angel playing?" Elena's fingers moved across the keys with increasing confidence. Muscle memory is a strange thing. She'd thought she'd forgotten, thought those years of practice had been erased by 3 years of not touching a piano, but the body remembers what the mind tries to forget. Her hands knew exactly where to go, how much pressure to use, when to pull back and when to push forward. The middle section of Claire de Lune built up just like it was supposed to, the notes climbing higher and more intense before falling back down into that gentle, peaceful resolution. Elena's whole body moved with the music now, swaying slightly, her shoulders rising and falling with each phrase. This was what she'd missed, not just playing the notes but feeling them, becoming part of them. The ballroom was completely silent now except for the piano. 200 people who had been eating and drinking and celebrating were now frozen, captivated by the unexpected concert happening in front of them. Some had pulled out their phones. Elena would learn about that later, but in this moment, she had no idea she was being recorded from multiple angles. The old gentleman who had asked her to play had tears running down his weathered cheeks. He wasn't even trying to hide them. Next to him, Carol the manager looked like she'd been turned to stone, her earlier disapproval transformed into something else entirely. Disbelief, maybe, or recognition that she was witnessing something special. Elena played the final phrases of the piece, letting each note ring out clear and pure before gently, carefully, bringing the music to its quiet ending. The last note hung in the air for a long moment. She lifted her hands from the keys slowly, almost reluctantly, and finally opened her eyes. The silence that followed lasted maybe 3 seconds, but it felt like an eternity. Then the room exploded. The applause started like a wave, building from every corner of the ballroom at once. But it wasn't just polite clapping. People were on their feet, actually standing up from their tables. They were cheering. Some were whistling. The sound was so loud and unexpected that Elena actually flinched, turning around on the piano bench with wide eyes. She felt her face go hot. This wasn't what she'd expected. She'd thought maybe a few people would notice, maybe some polite applause, and then she'd quickly return to clearing tables. But this was something else entirely. The bride was moving toward her now, almost running in her wedding dress, tears streaming down her face. Elena stood up quickly, instinctively, not sure what was happening. The bride reached her and, without warning, pulled her into a tight hug. "Thank you," the bride sobbed into Elena's shoulder. "Thank you so much." Elena stood there awkwardly, her arms eventually coming up to return the hug. She could feel the bride shaking with emotion. Over the bride's shoulder, Elena could see the whole room still on their feet, still clapping. Her co-workers looked stunned. Michael was grinning like he'd just discovered his friend had secret superpowers. Another server, Jennifer, had her hand over her mouth, looking like she might cry too. The bride finally pulled back, wiping her eyes and probably ruining her makeup, but she didn't seem to care. "That was my mother's favorite piece," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "My mom, she died 6 months ago, cancer." Elena felt her own throat tighten. "I'm so sorry." "We were supposed to have a pianist play it during the ceremony," the bride continued, "but he got sick this morning and canceled. I was heartbroken. I thought it was a sign, you know, that some things just aren't meant to be." She grabbed Elena's hands. "But then you played it perfectly. It felt like Mom was here. Like she sent you to me." The old gentleman appeared beside his granddaughter, his phone in his hand. "I recorded it," he said softly to Elena. "I hope that's okay. I wanted to capture it." Elena nodded, still processing everything that was happening. She didn't know that he'd already sent that video to his entire family's group chat. She didn't know that 2 of the guests had already posted it to their social media accounts. She didn't know that in the next few hours, while she finished her shift and drove home exhausted, that video would start spreading beyond this ballroom, beyond this city, beyond anything she could imagine. The bride's father approached, a tall man with kind eyes that looked remarkably like his daughter's. He pressed something into Elena's hand. She looked down and saw several bills.
A lot of bills? Oh no, I can't. Elena tried to push it back.
I was just helping out. You did more than help out, he said firmly. You gave my daughter all of us a gift tonight, please. The crowd was still applauding. Some people coming closer to see the mysterious server who played like a concert pianist. Carol finally approached, and Elena braced herself for a lecture about staying in her role and not disturbing the guests. But Carol's expression was softer than Elena had ever seen it. That was incredible, Carol said quietly. Then louder to the crowd, how about one more? The room erupted in agreement. Cheers, whistles, people calling out, yes, and please. The bride nodded enthusiastically, squeezing Elena's hand. Elena looked at all the faces watching her, waiting, hoping. She felt exposed and terrified and alive in a way she hadn't felt in years. Her fingers were already itching to touch those keys again. Okay, she said, her voice barely audible over the noise. One more. As she turned back to the piano, she had no idea that this decision, this one extra song, would change everything. Elena sat back down at the piano, her legs feeling a bit shaky. The room was still buzzing with energy from her first performance, and now everyone was watching her with full attention. No more background noise, no more side conversations. Just 200 pairs of eyes focused on the server who apparently could play piano, like she'd been doing it professionally for years. She took a breath and thought about what to play next. Her mind scrolled through all the pieces she used to know, all those hours of practice coming back to her in flashes. She settled on Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major. It was emotional, beautiful, and right now, sitting at this piano with all these people watching, she felt every bit of emotion she'd been pushing down for 3 years rising to the surface. Her fingers found the opening notes, and this time there was no hesitation. She dove straight into it, letting the music pour out of her like water from a broken dam. This piece was different from Clair de Lune. It was more passionate, more raw. And Elena played it that way, putting everything she'd been holding back into each note. She thought about her dad and how she'd had to watch him get weaker every day until the cancer finally took him 2 years ago. She thought about selling her keyboard to help pay for his medical bills, crying in her car afterward because it felt like giving up on herself. She thought about every wedding she'd served at, watching other people celebrate their happiness while she felt stuck in neutral, just trying to survive. All of it went into the music. Every disappointment, every sacrifice, every moment she told herself that dreams were for other people, not for girls who had bills to pay and no safety net. The room was absolutely silent except for the piano. But this silence felt different than before. It felt heavy, emotional, like everyone in the room could feel what Elena was feeling. Some people had tears in their eyes. The bride was crying again, holding on to her new husband. Even some of the groomsmen, tough-looking guys who'd been joking around all night, looked moved. Phones were up everywhere now, little lights glowing in the dimmed ballroom as people recorded. Elena didn't see them. She was too lost in the music, in the release of finally letting herself feel everything she'd been avoiding. Her shoulders moved with the phrases, her whole upper body swaying as the music built to its emotional peaks and fell back down to gentle whispers. When the final notes faded away, there was a moment of complete stillness. Then the applause came again, even louder than before. People weren't just clapping. They were calling out bravo and amazing. The bride started it, but soon the whole room was chanting, one more, one more. Elena laughed, overwhelmed, shaking her head. I have to get back to work, she said, but her voice was drowned out by the noise. Carol appeared next to the piano, and Elena expected her to end this and send her back to clearing tables. Instead, Carol surprised her. Your shift ends in 15 minutes anyway, she said with a small smile. Go ahead. So Elena played one more, and then somehow, one more after that. The bride requested her favorite pop song, and Elena played it by ear, improvising the arrangement as she went. People started dancing. The whole atmosphere shifted from formal wedding reception to intimate concert, with everyone gathered around the piano area. By the time Elena finally stood up from the piano bench for the last time, her hands were sore in the best way. The bride hugged her again, and so did the bride's father and the old grandfather who'd started this whole thing. Random guests came up to thank her, to tell her she was talented, to ask where they could hear her play again. Elena didn't know what to say to that last question. "I don't really perform," she explained over and over. This was just a one-time thing, but as she went to the back room to grab her things and clock out, she felt different. Lighter somehow. Like something that had been sleeping inside her had woken up and stretched after a very long nap. Her coworker Michael caught up with her as she was getting her jacket. "Dude, that was insane," he said, his eyes still wide. "I had no idea you could play like that. Why are you working here?" Elena shrugged, the question hitting a bit too close to home. "Same reason as everyone else. Rent doesn't pay itself." She drove home in her old Honda, humming one of the pieces she'd played. It was almost midnight and she was exhausted, but it was a good kind of tired. The kind that comes from doing something that matters, even if it was just for one night. When she got to her small apartment and finally checked her phone, her eyes went wide. 73 missed calls, hundreds of text messages, Instagram notifications going crazy, Facebook Messenger blowing up. What on earth? She opened her social media and her heart stopped. The video. Multiple videos, actually. The old grandfather had posted one, but so had at least a dozen guests. And they weren't just sitting there. They were spreading. Thousands of views. Tens of thousands. Comments pouring in from strangers. "Who is this woman?" Someone wrote. "She needs a record deal immediately." "I'm literally crying," another comment said. "The way she plays with such emotion. You can tell music is her passion." Someone find out who she is and get her performing professionally, because this is a crime against humanity that she's not already famous. One video had been shared by someone with a lot of followers, and it was going properly viral. The caption read, "Wedding server is secretly a piano prodigy. This is what hidden talent looks like. Wait until the end when everyone realizes what they're hearing." Elena sat on her couch, still in her work uniform, scrolling through hundreds and hundreds of comments. Some people were angry that someone with this much talent was having to work as a server. Others were sharing their own stories of abandoned dreams. Many were just blown away by the performance itself, but 3 messages stood out from all the noise. The first was from an email address she didn't recognize. The subject line said, "Berklee College of Music Admissions Inquiry." Elena's hand shook as she opened it. The dean of admissions had seen the video and wanted to discuss possible late admission for their performance program. There might be scholarship opportunities available for the right candidate. Elena read it 3 times to make sure it was real. Berklee. The music school she'd dreamed about when she was 17, before reality crashed in. They were reaching out to her. The second message was from a talent management agency in Los Angeles. They represented musicians and wanted to talk about representation, about opportunities, about actually making a career out of music. The third message was from a company called Premier Events. They specialized in high-end weddings and corporate events, and they were offering her a position as their exclusive pianist. The salary they mentioned was more than triple what she made now serving tables. Elena set her phone down and just stared at the wall of her tiny apartment. 12 hours ago, she'd been a server putting herself through business school, trying to be practical, trying to be realistic. She'd given up on music. She'd made peace with it, or at least she thought she had. Now her phone wouldn't stop buzzing. Strangers around the world were watching her play piano. Opportunities she'd stopped dreaming about were literally landing in her inbox. Part of her felt excited, almost dizzy with possibility. But another part felt terrified. What if this was just a fluke? What if the attention faded in a week and she'd quit her job for nothing? What if she took a risk and failed? She'd built a safe life. Small, maybe. Limited, definitely. But safe. Predictable. She knew how to be a server and a student. She knew how to keep her head down and pay her bills and not hope for too much. That was survivable, but this was asking her to hope again. To dream again. To believe that maybe, just maybe, she could have the life she'd wanted before everything fell apart. Elena picked up her phone and watched one of the videos again. She barely recognized herself in it. The woman playing piano in that video looked free. She looked alive. She looked like someone who belonged at a piano, not carrying trays of food. The comments kept coming. The view count kept climbing. By morning, the video had over 1 million views. News outlets were starting to pick up the story. Viral wedding server stuns internet with hidden piano talent. From tables to keys, server's unexpected performance captivates millions. Elena didn't sleep much that night. She lay in bed staring at the ceiling, thinking about the 3 messages sitting in her inbox. 3 different paths, 3 different futures, all because she'd said yes to an old man's simple request to play one song. Her phone buzzed again. Another email, this one from a local morning news show. They wanted her to come on and share her story, to play live on television. Elena closed her eyes and took a deep breath. Tomorrow she'd have to make some decisions. Big decisions, life-changing decisions. But tonight, she just let herself feel the weight of possibility settling over her like a blanket. She'd played the piano again. After 3 years of silence, she'd played. And the world had responded in a way she never could have imagined. The question now was, what was she going to do about it? 2 weeks later, Elena stood backstage at Channel 7's morning show studio trying to calm her racing heart. The makeup artist had just finished with her and she barely recognized herself in the mirror. She looked polished, professional, like someone who belonged on television. It felt weird. The video had hit 15 million views. 15 million. Elena couldn't even wrap her head around that number. She'd gone from being completely anonymous to having strangers recognize her at the grocery store. Yesterday, someone had stopped her at the gas station to tell her that her story had inspired them to pick up painting again after 20 years. 5 minutes. Elena, a production assistant said, popping her head into the green room. Elena nodded, wiping her sweaty palms on her dress. They'd sent her a dress to wear for the appearance. A real designer dress. This whole thing felt surreal, like she was living in someone else's life. Her phone buzzed. Another message. She'd gotten thousands over the past 2 weeks, but she'd learned to filter out the noise and focus on the ones that mattered. This one was from her mom. Watching from home, honey. Your dad would be so proud. I'm proud. You've got this. Elena felt tears prick her eyes but blinked them back quickly. The makeup artist would kill her if she cried now. Her dad. God, she wished he could see this. He was the one who'd driven her to piano lessons twice a week for years. He was the one who'd sat through every recital, recording on his phone, beaming with pride. Elena, we're ready for you. She took a deep breath and followed the production assistant through a maze of hallways. The studio was bright and loud, with cameras and crew members moving around like a well-choreographed dance. The hosts, a friendly-looking man and woman, stood near a set of couches. Behind them, she could see it. A beautiful grand piano waiting. Elena, welcome. The female host, Jennifer, came over with a warm smile and shook her hand. We're so excited to have you. Just be yourself, okay? We're going to chat for a bit and then you'll play for us. Sound good? Elena managed to nod. Be yourself. That was easier said than done when you were about to be on live television. The interview started, and somehow Elena found her voice. She told them about working at Riverside Manor, about the old grandfather's request, about not having touched a piano in 3 years. Jennifer asked her about giving up music, and Elena was honest. It wasn't really a choice, she explained. My dad got sick, cancer. The bills were overwhelming, and music school was expensive. I had to be practical. I had to survive. Music felt like a luxury I couldn't afford anymore. The male host, David, leaned forward. But you clearly never stopped loving it. No, Elena said softly. I never stopped loving it. I just stopped believing I could have it. Then came the question she'd been dreading. So what happens now? You've got all these opportunities coming your way. What are you going to do? Elena paused. It was the same question she'd been asking herself for 2 weeks straight. She'd barely slept, going back and forth in her head. The safe choice versus the scary choice. Security versus dreams. Honestly, Elena said, I'm terrified. Part of me wants to just go back to my normal life and pretend this never happened. Because that's safe, you know? I know how to do safe. But, Jennifer prompted gently. But I played piano again after 3 years, and it felt like coming home, Elena continued, her voice getting stronger. It felt like remembering who I used to be before life got hard. And I think maybe I owe it to myself to try. Even if I fail. Even if it's scary. The studio audience applauded, and Elena felt something shift inside her chest. She'd said it out loud. She'd made her decision right there on live television without even planning to. "Well, we can't wait to hear you play," David said. "Take us to that piano." Elena stood and walked over to the piano, and suddenly the nervousness melted away. This was familiar territory. This was home. She sat down, adjusted the bench, and let her fingers rest on the keys. "I'm going to play the piece I played that night," she told the camera. "Claire de Lune. Because this is where it all started, where I started remembering that some dreams don't die, they just wait." She played, and the studio went quiet. When she finished, the applause was thunderous. But what Elena didn't know was that while she was playing, something else was happening. In the green room, the old grandfather from the wedding had arrived. He'd kept in touch with Elena over the past 2 weeks, checking on her, encouraging her. But he'd also been working on something in the background, something he hadn't told her about yet. When Elena came off stage, still buzzing from the performance, she was surprised to see him waiting. "Mr. Chen," she said, using the name she'd learned from the bride. "What are you doing here?" He smiled, that same kind smile from the wedding night. "I needed to talk to you, and I brought some people with me." That's when Elena noticed them. The bride, Victoria, was there with her new husband. But there were others too, lots of others. At least 30 people crowded into the backstage area. "What's going on?" Elena asked, confused. Victoria stepped forward, her eyes shining. "After the wedding, after the video went viral, my grandfather and I started talking about how your story touched us, about how you gave up your dream to take care of your dad, about how talent and passion shouldn't be limited by money. We started a crowdfunding campaign," Mr. Chen continued. "We didn't tell you because we didn't want you to feel pressure or obligation. We just put your story out there and asked people to help if they could." Elena's heart started pounding. "What kind of campaign?" Victoria pulled out her phone and showed Elena the screen. It was a crowdfunding page with Elena's picture from the wedding video. The goal had been $50,000 to help with music school costs. The amount raised made Elena's knees go weak. $237,000. "That's not possible," Elena whispered, staring at the number. "Your story resonated with people," Mr. Chen said gently. "Thousands of people donated. Some gave $5. Some gave $1,000. They all wanted to help make sure your dream didn't have to stay buried." The people in the room started introducing themselves. A woman who'd given up painting to become an accountant and regretted it every day. A man who'd wanted to be a writer but became a lawyer instead to please his parents. A young guy who was currently working 3 jobs to afford art school and saw hope in Elena's story. They were strangers, but they all shared the same thing. They understood what it meant to sacrifice dreams for survival, and they wanted to help make sure Elena didn't have to make that choice anymore. Elena couldn't hold back the tears this time. They spilled down her cheeks as she looked at all these faces. People she'd never met who had decided her dream was worth fighting for. "I don't know what to say," she managed to get out. "Say you'll use it," Victoria said, taking Elena's hands. "Say you'll go to music school. Say you'll choose the scary path instead of the safe one. Because when you played at my wedding, you didn't just give me a gift. You gave yourself one too. You remembered who you are." The production assistant appeared, looking apologetic. "I'm sorry, but we need to clear the area." But before they left, Mr. Chen handed Elena an envelope. "One more thing," he said. "Inside is a letter from the dean at Berkeley. They've officially accepted you for the fall semester, and with the money from the campaign, you can afford it." Elena opened the envelope with shaking hands. The letter was real. The acceptance was real. All of it was real. That evening, Elena sat in her apartment surrounded by paperwork. The acceptance letter. The crowdfunding page printed out with all the names of donors and their messages. The contract, from Premier Events offering her weekend work at twice her current salary, while she studied. The business card from the talent agency in Los Angeles. Her laptop was open to an email she was composing. Her 2 weeks' notice to Riverside Manor. Her withdrawal form from community college. Papers that represented the end of her safe life and the beginning of something unknown. Her phone rang. It was her old piano teacher, Mrs. Rodriguez, the woman who'd trained her for 12 years. She'd seen the video. "I always knew you were meant for this," Mrs. Rodriguez said, her voice thick with emotion. "Even when you had to quit lessons, I knew someday you'd find your way back. Music doesn't let go of people like you, Elena. It just waits." After they hung up, Elena looked around her small apartment. She'd built a life here. A small one, a careful one, a safe one. But safe wasn't the same as happy. Safe wasn't the same as alive. She thought about that moment at the wedding when her fingers first touched the piano keys after 3 years. The fear, the excitement, the feeling of coming home to herself. Then she thought about her dad, about how he'd worked overtime to pay for her lessons, about how he'd always told her that talent was a gift you didn't waste, about how he'd want her to try, even if trying meant risking failure. Elena picked up her pen and signed the paperwork. All of it. The acceptance letter, the contract, the forms that would change everything. She was going to do it. She was going to bet on herself. She was going to choose the dream over the safety net. And for the first time in 3 years, Elena felt something she'd almost forgotten. Hope. Real, terrifying, beautiful hope. The kind that made her heart race and her hands shake, and her future feel wide open instead of narrowly defined. She was going to play piano. Not as a server who happened to know how, but as a musician, as someone who chose art over fear. Whatever happened next, at least she'd know she tried. 1 year later, Elena stood in the grand ballroom of Riverside Manor once again. But everything was different now. The chandelier lights still sparkled the same way, the ivory roses still decorated the tables, and another couple was celebrating their wedding day. But this time, Elena wasn't carrying trays or clearing plates. This time she was the featured performer. She wore an elegant black dress that actually fit the occasion. Her hair was styled professionally. But more than her appearance, it was the way she carried herself that had changed. There was a confidence in her posture that hadn't been there a year ago. A sense of belonging. The past 12 months had been a whirlwind. Elena had moved to Boston in August to start at Berklee College of Music. The first few weeks had been overwhelming. She was older than most of the other students, and she'd felt behind after 3 years away from serious music study. There were nights she'd called her mom crying, wondering if she'd made a terrible mistake. But then something shifted. Her professors recognized her raw talent and her work ethic. The years she'd spent working multiple jobs while going to community college had taught her discipline that a lot of the younger students didn't have yet. She knew how to manage her time. She knew how to push through when things got hard. And most importantly, she knew what it felt like to lose her dream once. She wasn't about to let it slip away again. She'd kept her weekend job with premier events, playing at weddings and corporate functions throughout the fall and winter. The money was good, way better than serving tables, and it gave her performance experience while she studied. Every weekend she'd take the train to wherever the event was, play for 3 or 4 hours, and return to her studies. The crowdfunding money that strangers had donated was carefully managed. Elena used it for tuition, books, and living expenses, but she was mindful of every dollar. She remembered what it felt like to count pennies for groceries. That kind of memory doesn't just disappear because your circumstances change. In January, the talent agency from Los Angeles had flown her out to perform at a high-profile celebrity wedding. That performance had led to more opportunities. A music producer in the audience had asked if she'd be interested in recording some pieces for a meditation and relaxation album. She'd said yes, and that album was set to release next month. But through it all, Elena had never forgotten where it started. Riverside Manor, the old grandfather's request. The moment she'd chosen to say yes instead of playing it safe. That's why when Carol, her former manager, had called to ask if she'd come back to play at a special wedding, Elena had immediately agreed. Even though she now commanded much higher fees for performances, even though her schedule was packed with opportunities, she'd made time for this. Because this wasn't just any wedding. It was Victoria's first anniversary party. The bride whose mother had loved Claire de Lune. The bride who had started the crowdfunding campaign that changed Elena's life. As guests filed into the ballroom, Elena sat at the piano warming up. She watched the faces of the staff rushing around preparing for the evening. She recognized some of them. Michael was still working here, and he'd nearly tackled her with a hug when she'd arrived earlier. Jennifer had moved on to a nursing program, but there were new faces too, young people working hard to pay bills and chase their own dreams. One of the new servers, a young woman probably around 20, kept glancing at the piano with an expression Elena recognized. Longing mixed with resignation. During a quiet moment, the girl approached hesitantly. "Are you Elena Rodriguez?" she asked. "The one from the video?" Elena smiled. "That's me." "I just wanted to say thank you," the girl said, her words tumbling out quickly like she was afraid she'd lose her nerve. "I'm a dancer." "Well, I was. I had to quit to help my family. But I saw your video last year and it made me think that maybe it's not over for me. Maybe someday I can find my way back too." Elena felt a lump form in her throat. This was why the video going viral had meant something beyond just her own life-changing. It had reminded people that dreams could be deferred but didn't have to be dead. "What's your name?" Elena asked. "Clarissa." "Clarissa, keep dancing however you can," Elena said firmly. "Even if it's just in your living room for 15 minutes a day. Don't let it go completely, because your body and your heart need to remember what it feels like, and when your chance comes, you'll be ready." The girl's eyes filled with tears. She nodded and hurried back to work, but Elena saw her wipe her face and stand a little taller. The anniversary party began, and Elena played. Not just Claire de Lune, though she did play that as Victoria and her husband shared their first dance of the evening. But she played dozens of other pieces throughout the night, reading the room's energy, choosing music that matched the moment. Between sets, Mr. Chen came to sit beside her on the piano bench. He'd aged a bit in the past year, but his eyes still held that same kindness. "You know," he said quietly, "when I asked you to play that night, I just wanted to give my granddaughter a wedding gift. I had no idea we'd end up giving you one too." "You gave me more than you know," Elena said. "You gave me permission to remember who I was, and the courage to become who I'm meant to be." "You did that yourself," he corrected gently. "I just asked the question. You're the one who said yes." Later in the evening, Victoria asked Elena to say a few words. Elena hadn't prepared a speech, but she stood up anyway, her heart pounding the way it had that first night. "A year ago, I was serving tables at a wedding in this room," she began, her voice carrying across the quiet ballroom. "I was exhausted. I was stuck. I'd given up on music because life had taught me that dreams were luxuries I couldn't afford." She paused, looking around at all the faces watching her. Staff and guests, strangers and friends. Then someone asked me to play piano, just one song, and I almost said no because I was scared. Scared I'd forgotten how. Scared I wasn't good enough anymore. Scared of remembering what I'd lost. Elena's voice got stronger, but I said yes. And that one yes changed everything. Not because the video went viral, though that was wild, but because I remembered that the parts of us we bury don't actually die. They just wait. They wait for us to be brave enough to dig them back up. She looked at Clarissa, the young server, standing in the back of the room. "If you're working a job you don't love to pay the bills, I see you. If you gave up on something that mattered because you had to be practical, I see you. If you have a talent or passion that's collecting dust because life got hard, I see you. And I want you to know that it's not too late. It's never too late. Maybe you can't quit your job tomorrow and chase your dream full-time. I couldn't either. But you can say yes to small opportunities. You can practice in stolen moments. You can keep that part of yourself alive until the bigger chance comes." The room was silent except for a few sniffles. Elena saw people wiping their eyes, including some of the staff. "Thank you, Victoria and Mr. Chen, for asking me to play that night. Thank you to everyone who donated to help me get to music school. And thank you to everyone watching who's stuck right now. Your moment will come, and when it does, I hope you'll be brave enough to say yes." The applause was warm and genuine. Elena returned to the piano and played one final song. As her fingers moved across the keys, she thought about the journey from that scared server to this confident musician. It hadn't been a straight line. There had been doubts and setbacks, moments when she'd wanted to quit and go back to the safety of her old life, but she'd kept going. And now here she was, making a living doing what she loved, studying at a top music school with an album coming out and more opportunities than she'd ever dreamed possible. The video was still out there, still being watched by new people every day, still inspiring comments from strangers about their own abandoned dreams. Elena had learned to see it not as a fluke or a lucky break, but as a reminder. A reminder that talent doesn't disappear just because circumstances force you to set it aside. A reminder that courage can look like saying yes to one small scary thing. A reminder that communities of strangers can rally around a story that touches something universal in all of us. As the party wound down and guests began to leave, Elena packed up her sheet music. Michael approached with a grin. "So, is this weird?" he asked. "Coming back here as the talent instead of the staff?" Elena laughed. "A little, but also it feels kind of full circle, you know? This place is where I remembered I was a musician. I'll always be grateful for that." She said her goodbyes to Victoria, Mr. Chen, and the staff. As she walked out to her car, now a slightly newer used Honda that actually had working air conditioning, she paused at the entrance and looked back at the venue. A year ago, she'd walked out these doors at midnight, exhausted and resigned to a small life. Tonight she walked out as someone who'd bet on herself and won. Not because everything was perfect or easy, but because she'd proven that dreams deferred didn't have to mean dreams denied. Elena drove back to her apartment, already thinking about tomorrow's classes and the performance she had next weekend. Her life was full now. Challenging, sometimes overwhelming, but full in the best way. And every time she sat down at a piano, she remembered that moment when an old man asked a simple question, and she found the courage to say yes. That one yes had unlocked everything else. Sometimes the biggest changes in life start with the smallest decisions. Sometimes coming home to yourself begins with one song, and sometimes the bravest thing you can do is remember who you were before the world taught you to play it safe. Elena had remembered, and in doing so, she'd found her way back to the life she was always meant to live.